you. And lastly, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Alison Noll, our co-lead pastor. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to start by saying thank you to those of you who were here this past Sunday for making our first Conversation Church a great success. There was a lot of positive feedback, so this is definitely something that we plan to repeat in the new year. During the service, I asked folks to submit some feedback about areas maybe in life or faith that were sticking points or areas that folks would like to see more programming. We got a lot of great suggestions. And so, based on that feedback, we've decided to hold something called River Roundtable. And we're going to do 3 of these before the end of the year. So these will be discussions that take place after the church service from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And in each session, we're going to discuss one topic together. So I'll start the discussion time by providing some perspective about the topic of the day, and then we'll open it up to everyone to discuss together. So on November 3rd, we're going to discuss LGBTQ affirming theology. What is the biblical and theological support for it? And on December 1st, we're going to talk about prayer. Folks had a lot of questions about what is prayer, how does it work, how do we respond if the thing we pray for doesn't seem to come to pass. And then on December 15th, we're going to talk about the Bible. Questions that came up there were, what is this thing really? How does it work? What are we meant to do with it? Especially, what are we meant to do with the parts that we might find problematic or troubling? So we'll get into some of those questions on December 15th. Parents, we would love for you to participate, so we will be providing childcare. We'll just need an advance RSVP to arrange that. And of course, anyone else is also welcome to attend. We'll provide pizza lunch for attendees, or if you prefer to get something else, there'll be about half an hour between the end of the service and the start of the discussion where you can run out and get something else. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to send me an email or use your connection card. Okay, so I'm excited. Today I'm kicking off a new sermon series. And for the next several weeks, we're going to be exploring the concept of courage together. So I have a question for all of you. How many of you would describe yourself as courageous people? All right, okay, I see like 7 or 8. Not very many. That doesn't surprise me. I don't know that courage is an adjective that many of us claim for ourselves, but I suspect that each of you is actually a lot more courageous than you might believe. The reason I say this is because it seems to me that everyday life often requires incredible courage. At times, it can take courage just to get up in the morning and face the day. And I think this is especially true when we're attempting to pursue lives of abundance, when we are seeking to center our lives around things like love, purpose, meaning, connection, and growth. Part of our hesitance to claim courage for ourselves may have to do with our understanding of what courage is. Sometimes we mistake courage with fearlessness. And so if we feel anxiety or fear, then we conclude that we must not be courageous people. But at its heart, courage is about choosing to face the difficulty or pain or uncertainty of life, not about denying the existence of those things. Other times, we confuse courage with heroics. And so we tend to associate courage only with special individuals or with dramatic events like martyrdom. Brené Brown, a researcher who studies courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy, frames the difference between courage and heroics in a way that I find helpful. She says, the root of the word courage is cor, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage had a very different definition than it does today. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Over time, this definition has changed, and today, courage is more synonymous with being heroic. Heroics is important, and we certainly need heroes, but I think we've lost touch with the idea that speaking honestly and openly about who we are, about what we're feeling, and about our experiences, good and bad, is the definition of courage. Heroics is often about putting our life on the line. Ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. In today's world, that's pretty extraordinary. I love this one particular line from her quote. Ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. This seems true to me. It takes courage to make ourselves vulnerable, to open ourselves up to the possibility of things like disappointment, remorse, failure, grief, rejection, hurt, or pain. So to help us think more about courage, I wanted to take a look together at a passage from the Gospel of Luke. Now, to be honest, I'm a bit surprised that I decided to speak on this passage today because it's a passage that's actually caused me a lot of pain personally over the years. But as I was preparing for this sermon, as I usually do, I begin to kind of think and pray and see if a passage came to mind. And, I started to feel an invitation from the Spirit to take another look at this one, to perhaps exercise a bit of courage myself in wrestling with this passage, to let myself feel all the feelings that it might bring up for me, and also to see if it might have something new and life-giving to say. So let's take a look. So at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus invited a small group of disciples to join him as he traveled from place to place teaching and healing. But as Jesus continued along, as he met more and more people and his reputation continued to grow, he found himself being followed at times by large crowds. So the passage says, "Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, 'Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, "This fellow began to build and was not able to finish." Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." All right, so there's a lot to unpack in this passage. Instead of jumping, as we sometimes do, straight into what this passage might mean for us now in our own context, I want us to think a bit about the logic within the story itself. So for reasons the passage does not state, it seems like Jesus was concerned about the fact that large crowds were traveling with him. Perhaps Jesus was overwhelmed by the crowds. The Gospels contain many stories of Jesus trying to seek solitude, so perhaps the issue was that he felt uncomfortable being continuously surrounded by such a large group of people. Or maybe Jesus was concerned that the people in the crowds didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. Jesus and his small group of disciples had chosen a very difficult way of life. They were itinerant, traveling from place to place. This meant that they did not have secure housing, nor did they have secure financial resources. Instead, they had to depend on the funding of their supporters, much like how here at the River our programming is supported by all of your financial giving. We don't know the names of all of the financial supporters of Jesus' ministry, but the Gospel of Luke tells us that at least 3 of them were women, who were named Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna. Jesus' way of life was not an easy one. It was unpredictable, precarious, and physically challenging. On top of that, Jesus was committed to following the way of unconditional love and standing in solidarity with the marginalized. This commitment often put Jesus in opposition to those who held social, religious, and political power. Joining Jesus in his travels was not without hardship and risk. This is what I believe that Jesus was trying to get at in this passage. He wasn't talking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus in a general sense for all people of all time. No, Jesus was specifically addressing what it meant to physically join him, his 12 disciples, and the others in their group, like the woman I mentioned earlier, on their journeys from place to place. I don't know if you have ever traveled with a group of people before, maybe a group of friends or family or coworkers. These kinds of group trips can be great, but they can also be incredibly challenging if everyone is not on the same page. If appropriate expectations are not set before the trip, it can lead to all kinds of discord and frustration and resentment. It can be stressful and hard to get things done. If you've experienced this, you'll know what I'm talking about and how painful this can be for everyone involved. So when you think about it this way, it seems like Jesus was being kind and discouraging the crowd from following him. He wasn't deeming them unworthy or asking them to prove themselves. He wasn't trying to discourage them for the sake of being mysterious or hardcore. Instead, he was trying to help members of the crowd understand what they would be getting themselves into if they were to join him. Of course, his followers would need to give up all of their possessions. They were itinerant and could only keep what they could carry with them. And the charge to hate family members makes more sense given this context, too. The word here that is translated as hate is, in the original language, is not used the same way that we use the word hate in English. Instead, it was often used in situations where there was a comparison being made. So it was used to make the point that one thing needed to be elevated over another. So in this case, Jesus was saying that joining him on his journeys meant elevating devotion to the mission they were on over their devotion to immediate family members. And this makes sense logically. If they were physically leaving their homes to follow Jesus, it would mean that they were deprioritizing their day-to-day commitment to the family members they were leaving behind. Jesus was not encouraging them to have negative feelings toward family members or to view familial relationships as unimportant. Instead, he was pointing out that they could not physically be in 2 places at once. He was highlighting how their decision to leave home would naturally impact many areas of their lives, including their relationships. So it's also important to note that Jesus did not ask these individuals in the crowds to follow him. The individuals in the crowd made the choice on their own, and Jesus wanted to be sure, for all of their sakes, that they knew what they were getting themselves into. He was encouraging them to count the costs. And he compared this process to the way a builder would ensure they had sufficient resources before starting a project, just like we needed to make sure we had sufficient resources before relocating here. Or he compared it also to a ruler, what a ruler would consider whether they had the forces to win a battle or if they should try to negotiate peace instead. Jesus was encouraging the members of the crowd to be strategic and forward-thinking, to make sure that they had given their decision due consideration and were prepared for the foreseeable challenges, if not the unforeseeable ones. So I mentioned earlier that I have personally experienced this passage being used in harmful ways. As some of you know, I did not grow up in the church. When I was a teenager, I started exploring Christianity through conversations with friends at school, and also by praying on my own. As I prayed, I began to have powerful, life-changing experiences of God's loving presence. Now, this period of exploration was a very exciting time in my life, but it was also an incredibly stressful one. I knew that if I were to pursue Christianity, it would have serious implications for my relationships with my family members. My mom had made it clear to me that she was not supportive of me exploring organized religion and Christianity in particular. And that if I decided to do so, she told me that she would not be able to have a relationship with me. Now, as you might imagine, hearing something like that at any point from a parent would be difficult, but it was especially so for me when I was 16 years old. So I did what I needed to do to survive. I kept my growing faith a secret. And this did not go over well with members of the first two Christian communities that I was a part of, the Christian club at my high school and then the Christian community I joined in college. Members of both of these groups would cite passages like the one that I've been talking about today to demonstrate the ways that I was sinning by lying to my family and by failing to willingly enter into the suffering that goes along with following Jesus. They told me that Jesus was calling me to deprioritize my family as well as my own needs. And they told me that I needed to find the courage to be faithful and to live out my faith openly no matter the cost. According to them, this was the right and only way for me to follow Jesus. When I was 19, during my freshman year of college, I did end up telling my parents about my faith by writing and mailing them a letter. And as I had predicted, things did not go well. My mom ended up disowning me for a period of time and would not allow me to interact with my younger siblings for fear that I would try to convert them. All of that was incredibly painful, but perhaps more so was the way that leaders in my Christian community responded to my decision to tell my parents. A day or so after I mailed the letter, while I was still anxiously waiting for a response from my family, leaders in the group surprised me while I was walking to the dining hall. They drove up to me and asked me to get in the car, telling me that they were taking me out to dinner to celebrate. I really didn't want to go, but at that moment, it was like beyond me to say no, so I just went along with it. I spent the meal at the Italian restaurant, alternating between feeling sick to my stomach and dissociating out of my body. While they told me how proud they were of me for the step I had taken, I couldn't wait for the meal to be over so I could just go somewhere and crawl in a hole. I knew that my life was about to fall apart in major ways, and instead of supporting me or mourning with me, these leaders wanted to celebrate my step of faith. You know, it's been almost 15 years since I graduated from college, and I've experienced a lot of healing in many areas. But even today, I'm still discovering and unraveling the ways that being part of a community that valued my faithfulness to God over my well-being has negatively impacted my life and faith. Now, I share this story for a number of reasons. To try to perhaps model a bit of what courageous vulnerability could look like, to demonstrate that our theology and biblical interpretation are not just intellectual exercises, but that they have real stakes in people's lives, and to highlight how what we bring to a passage can profoundly impact the conclusions we will reach. If we come to a passage like the one we are discussing today with the expectation that it contains general guidance for how to follow Jesus in all contexts and circumstances, then we will arrive at certain conclusions. But as I demonstrated earlier, we'll come to a different set of conclusions if we approach a passage seeking to understand its own internal logic, or the author's intentions, or how it may have been understood by its original audience. Our goals, assumptions, and expectations, not to mention our identities and our contexts, all influence our biblical interpretations. Now, this isn't to say that the Bible does not have relevance for us today. It absolutely does. But I just want to caution that we need to be thoughtful and embrace nuance when drawing conclusions about application in our own lives. So what can we take away from this passage in the year 2024? What does it mean for us now when following Jesus does not mean joining him physically on his journeys, but instead looks like choosing to be rooted in and formed by his life, teachings, death, and resurrection? For me, one of the biggest takeaways is the value of being thoughtful when making decisions, of being strategic and forward-thinking, of considering possible implications, of counting both the costs and the benefits. And this is where courage comes into play. If we are intentional about pursuing things like purpose, meaning, connection, and growth, if we are serious about following the way of Jesus, that is the way of unconditional love, then there will be countless situations when we need to decide whether or not to face difficulty or pain or uncertainty for the sake in living with accordance with our values and commitments. When we will be invited to practice courage. Now, we do not need to manufacture these kinds of opportunities. Life will present them to us over and over again, whether we like it or not. But especially so if we are actively pursuing lives of abundance. For example, it takes courage to move toward abundance by doing things like dreaming big, choosing to hope, fighting for change, being ourselves, putting ourselves out there, risking failure or rejection, admitting we were wrong, apologizing, asking for help, starting over, trying again, trying something new, speaking up, both standing up for ourselves and for others. Sometimes saying no takes courage. Other times saying yes does. It takes courage to sit with our pain or discomfort, to have difficult conversations, to share our stories, to love others in the face of death, and so on. Living an abundant life takes tremendous courage. And so it is important for us to be clear with ourselves about why we want to lean into courage, if in fact we actually do. We should not lean into courage because it's the right or admirable thing to do. Instead, let us do so because it will help us to better embody the values that matter most to us. Or because it will help us to embrace healing and wholeness. Or because it will allow us to move toward the lives of mutual flourishing that we dream of. Nor should we lean into courage blindly. But as Jesus suggested in today's passage, let us do so with eyes wide open, with a clear understanding of both the potential benefits and costs of our decisions, and ideally at a time when we know we have the bandwidth and support we need to make it through whatever may happen next. Telling my parents about my faith was ultimately a very good thing for me. It allowed me to live my life more freely and over time to rebuild relationships with my family members that were more authentic and real. I would not be here speaking to you today, as a pastor if I hadn't taken that step. But looking back, I wish that I had done it on my own terms, when I truly felt ready and when I had the support that I needed, instead of because I felt like I had to in order to be accepted and to belong, both in spiritual community and to God. I wish I had felt more supported in the incredible complexity of what I was trying to navigate as a young person. And I wish I had known that there were other more nuanced and life-giving ways of following Jesus than what was presented to me at the time. The Bible is clear that taking up our crosses daily is an important part of following Jesus. This means reckoning with things like pain, hurt, rejection, disappointment, remorse, failure, loss, and grief. As Brown said, it means putting our vulnerability on the line. But I urge you, let's not do so because we are glorifying suffering and sacrifice, or out of guilt, fear, shame, or manipulation. Instead, let's follow the way of love with courage, even through life's inevitable pain and hardship, with a deep sense of freedom. And let's do so because we are truly convinced, each one of us for ourselves, that this is ultimately the path to life and to mutual flourishing. So to end today, I would like to share a prayer for courage from a United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. Dear God, we pray for courage in the face of fear and uncertainty. Help us to take bold steps towards our dreams and to stand up for what is right. Give us the strength to face challenges head on and to persevere even when the path is difficult. Let our courage inspire others to find their own bravery. We ask for your presence when we feel afraid and for the reassurance that we are never alone. Thank you for your constant support. May we find the courage to speak up against injustice and to advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. Help us to confront our fears and doubts, trusting in your guidance and strength to see us through. Let us be courageous in our relationships, willing to be vulnerable and open in our interactions with others. We pray for those who face dangers and threats daily, asking for your protection and strength for them. Thank you for the examples of courage we see in others. Help us to draw inspiration from their bravery and to cultivate that same courage in our own lives. Amen.